What's an alternative dispute resolution lawyer? Well, you might be going through a separation and divorce because that's why you're watching this video or listening to this recording. And the thing is that, well, maybe you've come across that or the descriptions of an alternative dispute resolution lawyer. Well, in this recording, I'm going to share with you what an alternative dispute resolution lawyer is, the kind of processes they engage in, and you're going to want to stick around till the end because I'm going to share with you, really importantly, 6 reasons why you want one of these guys, one of these alternative dispute resolution lawyers. So let's dive right in. My name is Val Heminger, and I have been a divorce lawyer, a family law lawyer, for more than 25 years. I am super passionate about helping families, changing families, navigate through the separation and divorce process in a way that is as stress-free as possible, that is as amicable as possible, and in a way that keeps you and your family's resources more intact. Now, when you fell in love, got married, maybe even had babies, you probably might not have been thinking about being in this place. That is wondering about your separation and divorce process, and of course, wondering about what kind of lawyer would be the best lawyer for your case, and of course, the question of alternative dispute resolution and what an alternative dispute resolution lawyer does. If you are getting a divorce or separation, these are some of the processes that an alternative dispute resolution lawyer will engage in. Depending on where you reside on this beautiful planet of ours, you are going to want to discover the kind of processes that are available that an alternative dispute resolution lawyer will engage in to get your matter resolved. The thing about an alternative dispute resolution lawyer means that they're lawyers who get you to the goal. What's the goal? Oh yes, having a final and legally binding separation agreement that is clear, that answers essentially 3 questions. If you've got kids, what's the parenting plan? Who's got guardianship? Who's making decisions? What's the schedule for parenting time? Secondly, about how you're going to divide your assets, and unfortunately for some families, your debt. And thirdly, of course, what the support obligation is, if anything, whether that be child support or spousal support. An alternative dispute resolution lawyer gets you to the answer to those questions, gets you with that legally binding settlement agreement without going to court. So, you want to avoid court? Let me count the ways. Your alternative dispute resolution lawyer will help you avoid court. First of all, well, here's one way. Sometimes what they'll do is this thing where they negotiate by way of letter or discussions on the phone or on Zoom or other video conferencing, where they negotiate a settlement on your behalf. You meet with your lawyer, you have discussions about what's important to you, you understand your rights, you understand your obligations, and typically after an exchange of financial information, you ask your lawyer to negotiate on your behalf. We call that, well, negotiation between lawyers. I know, it's not very exciting, but that's the name of it. And when lawyers negotiate, that can be a really effective way of getting your matter resolved. The risk, however, is that when lawyers negotiate, which can be a great thing, if they end up writing letters too many back and forth, we find that it escalates the expense of your separation and divorce process without getting it resolved. So at my firm, Pathway Legal in British Columbia, that serves clients all over British Columbia, what we do is we say, you know what, we could start with trying to negotiate an agreement, but if we have a letter back and forth more than a couple times, we don't want to continue with that process because we want to be able to see your matter resolved. So if we've gone back and forth a few times with letters and we haven't gotten you to a final agreement, our next step is to move into another process that's going to see your matter resolved. So that brings me to another process that your alternative dispute resolution lawyer will likely engage in. And what is that? Well, we call that the four-way meeting. So typically, what a four-way meeting is, after the parties have exchanged financial information and the lawyers feel that they have the information they need to be able to negotiate on your behalf, you sit down, you and your lawyer and your spouse, ex-spouse, and their lawyer, and that can either be in someone's office or by way of video conferencing, sometimes by phone, but mostly we like to see everybody around the room. And the lawyers with our clients roll up our sleeves and, well, hammer out a deal. And what we find is that if the parties are relatively amicable and they have been relatively or are very candid about their financial picture with each other, for example, and this is really important, the lawyers have skills in alternative dispute resolution, we find this can be a very cost-effective way of getting your matter resolved. I know in my law firm, Pathway Legal, in Victoria, British Columbia, what we do is, well, we think four-way meetings are a great idea. Most of the time. There's the odd lawyer where we go, I'm not going to waste my client's valuable resources meeting with somebody who is not prepared to engage appropriately in negotiation in a way that's going to get us to yes, in a way that's going to see our matters resolved. So if a lawyer is super combative, super testy, super rude, no, I'm not going to waste my client's money or my time entering into a frustrating process that I'm very sure won't come up with a result. So if a four-way meeting is not for you and your situation, you might want to consider mediation. Now, mediation is a great option. And if you have an alternative dispute resolution lawyer, they are going to be very well trained in skills in mediation. They will have learned about interest-based negotiation. They will have learned about non-positional bargaining. They will have learned about getting curious about what the other side is saying that will help you as the client. In mediation, what happens is you and your lawyer and your ex-spouse or spouse and their lawyer, everybody sits down, but there's a fifth person in the room. That fifth person is a mediator. That mediator, very trained in what? Alternative dispute resolution. They don't have to be a lawyer, but a lot of times they are. Sometimes they have a social work background, for example. The point being is that they have to be trained and authorized to call themselves as mediators. As mediators, they are neutral. They do not have the authority to decide your matter for you. A win for the mediator is to make sure that the two of you come to a legally binding final settlement without the intervention of court. A win for them is that you've settled everything. A common question that comes up is people might say, if I go to mediation, do we have to bring our lawyers there? Do our lawyers have to be present? The short answer is nope, not at all. You don't need your lawyer present for mediation. Now, some mediators, they won't do mediation unless people bring their lawyers. Why is that? Well, often what happens is when people end up reaching an agreement, the mediator will write up that agreement. Most of the time, here's the bullet points of what we agreed to, and they will tell the parties, go and get some independent legal advice from your lawyer. The challenge that happens, at least in our experience, is that sometimes what happens is some people bring, after they've spent all this time, energy, resources with the mediation process, they bring the document, this is what we agreed to their lawyer, and the lawyer is saying, wait, no, I don't like that. I think you should change this. I think you should change this. I think you should change this. And then the agreement itself becomes completely unraveled. Now, what the lawyer might not know is that in that process, maybe one person gave up a significant something in order for this something over here to work. So what's really helpful, we find, is that if you drag your lawyers along to the mediation process, often what happens, even within a day, is that you're able to get legal advice throughout the process and walk out at the end of the day with a legally binding settlement agreement. which is, of course, the goal. If you like what you see here, hit that like button and hit the subscribe button so you will be kept apprised of every time I release a new video. And last but not least, if you want to leave a comment, be sure to do so because I will always respond. Finally, depending upon your jurisdiction, your alternative dispute resolution lawyer will probably know a lot about collaborative law, and you might want to find out if they are a member of their local collaborative family law group. What is collaborative law and what makes it different from mediation, for example, or mediation arbitration, for example? Well, here's what makes it different. Just like in mediation, where you enter into an agreement to mediate, just like mediation arbitration, where you enter into an agreement to do mediation arbitration, in collaborative family law, you enter into an agreement to enter into the collaborative family law process. When you enter into a formal collaborative agreement, not only do you and your ex-spouse enter into that agreement, but your lawyers enter into that agreement also. In that process, what happens is that you all agree that you are going to be forthright about exchanging information. You're not going to keep financial secrets from each other. Your lawyers, in order to practice family law, in order to be authorized, have to have very detailed, ongoing, you guessed it, alternative dispute resolution training. In fact, in most jurisdictions, for a lawyer to practice collaborative family law, they actually have had to have practiced family law for a certain period of time before they're even allowed to practice using the methodology. But what's so powerful about the methodology is you're in fact, in the agreement, you say, we're going to sort this out. We're going to resolve matters, but we're not going to court. So unlike the mediation process, where if everything falls apart, someone can still go to court and get a court order, in the collaborative law process, everybody says, nope, we're going to sort this out and we're going to get it finished and nobody gets to go to court. Now, of course, sometimes things do go sideways in that process. If they do, what happens? Well, people have to actually fire their lawyers and get new lawyers and start from scratch again, which is a really big deterrent for people to walk away from the collaborative law process. The thing about collaborative law is that it is voluntary, the process. Mediation arbitration, that's a voluntary process. In some jurisdictions, you can compel somebody to go to mediation if you've started a Supreme Court action. So it's not exactly always voluntary. However, if you drag someone to the mediation process, the likelihood of them getting it completed is, resolved is pretty high. So your alternative dispute resolution lawyer is somebody who's going to have training in all of those kinds of strategies, those methodologies, as it were, to get your family matter resolved. Now, as I promised, I'm going to share with you the reasons why you want to hire an alternative dispute resolution lawyer for your family law matter. First of all, here's the big thing. I shared this big thing with you by asking you a question. Why not keep your hard-earned resources, your family's resources, for your family, your future, your children if you've got them, even your ex-spouse, rather than spending all of your resources on lawyers? Alternative dispute resolution tends to be less of an investment, less money, it costs less than the traditional method of going to court. Almost always. The second reason why you want to hire an alternative dispute resolution lawyer, I'll ask another question. Do you really want to hate your ex forever? Do you ever notice that when you really hate someone's guts, or really don't like them, it's really exhausting? Well, the thing is that if you go through the court process, the chances of you and your ex ever being friends or friendly or amicable, well, the likelihood of that goes way down. And you compare that to people who have resolved their matters through negotiation with lawyers or mediation arbitration, collaborative law. Well, the likelihood of them having some kind of a friendship after And it's really important if that's a possibility for you if you have kids. The point being is if you used an alternative dispute resolution lawyer and you were able to resolve your matter using one of those alternative dispute resolution strategies, chances are you won't have to or feel like you hate your ex forever. Case in point, when my marriage ended after 18 years, well, things were pretty tense at the beginning. And ultimately, we resolved our matter through what? Negotiation with lawyers. In fact, I was super upset that my husband hired a divorce lawyer. Why? Why would he hire a divorce lawyer? And I thought, okay, fair. You know what? He's hired a divorce lawyer because he's divorcing a divorce lawyer. So fair enough. Well, after we got our matter resolved, the thing is that, and even though things were tense for a period of time, now it's several years later, well, we're kind of friendly with each other. In fact, he came over to decorate Easter eggs last Easter, came over for Christmas dinner last Christmas. Point being, that's really great because we have a long history together and also we share kids. And it's really good for our kids and our entire family. So if you asked me when we first separated if we'd ever be friends again, I was highly doubtful. What I do know is that if we'd gone through the traditional court process, we wouldn't be friends again. And now, well, we're almost friends. Maybe not best friends, but almost friends. The third reason why you want to hire an alternative dispute resolution lawyer, well, the thing is that courts, they are a public proceeding. Think about Johnny Depp and Amber Heard, or Tiger Woods and whatever his wife's name was, or Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie and the other one, Jennifer Aniston. I mean, my gosh, do you want your dirty laundry splashed over everywhere? Now, you're probably not as famous as any of those guys, but I have to tell you, I know I live in a relatively small city, and it's amazing how many people will come to me going, hey, did I see my neighbor in the courthouse the other day? That kind of thing. The point is that going through a separation and divorce is a highly personal thing. It's a very personal experience. And do you want that personal information, details about stuff the most intimate to you and your family out there in the public eye? Maybe not. Here's another reason. Now, having a creative lawyer might sound like an oxymoron to you. But the thing is that if you do the traditional court route, well, the judges, they're kind of obligated to follow the law, and the law isn't really creative. For example, if people are disagreeing as to what to do with their family residence, in our jurisdiction, what will happen? The judge will be like, fine, sell it, divide the proceeds. Well, the thing is that for a lot of people, if they're going to end up selling their house and dividing the proceeds, maybe that ends up putting them both backwards financially. The thing is that when people go through an alternative dispute resolution process, they can often come up with ways of dealing with their finances, parenting their children, coming up with ways of making sure their kids have the best childhoods as possible by being creative. So for example, if people sell their house, often they'll end up getting themselves out of the real estate market and they'll end up paying exorbitant rent. And that actually isn't good for either spouse, and it's definitely not good for the children. So if you use an alternative dispute resolution, and I've done this in the past in my cases, sometimes we say, okay, well, maybe one of the parents stays in the family home and the parties continue to own it. And they continue to own it till the youngest child finishes high school. That can be a really great thing to do for a family and for the kids and for everybody's finances. Of course, it's not anything a court would order, not my experience that I've seen. And it requires a fairly high degree of cooperation between the two spouses, or now ex-spouses. However, there is an opportunity to be creative in a way that makes sense for your situation, your unique family's situation. Of course, another reason why you will want to use an alternative dispute resolution lawyer is because, well, if you do the traditional court route, it can take so long. In some jurisdictions, courts take months or years to book a trial date. And also, not a lot gets done in one day of court. What you could settle in one day of mediation, for example, can sometimes take 10 days of court time. So the thing is what I'm saying to you is, wouldn't you rather get on with living your future life than waiting for a trial date to see your matter resolved? Yeah, I'll bet you want to get on with your future. And finally, the most penultimate thing about why you want to use a dispute resolution lawyer, an alternative dispute resolution lawyer, is because if you go through one of those processes, the chances are huge that you are going to alleviate a ton of stress. Going through traditional court is stressful. It's stressful for you, it's stressful for the lawyers, it's stressful for your spouse, it's stressful for the other lawyer. So why not save yourself a whole lot of stress and, well, hire an alternative dispute resolution lawyer and see how you can get your matter resolved. So if you like what you see here, hit the like button, subscribe so you can be kept apprised of all my new content as soon as it's released. And if you want to know more, go to thebetterdivorceproject.com. That's thebetterdivorceproject.com. You'll find tons of treasures on that site, including the ability to sign up for the Better Divorce Project newsletter, where you will find helpful tips, strategies for helping you through your separation and divorce.